If there's one thing I've learned over the years working in law enforcement, it's that people love to call the authorities to solve problems that shouldn't even exist. I've seen people call 911 because their neighbor was grilling a barbecue that smelled too strong. I've taken calls about music that's too loud, that, in the end, were just old people listening to jazz at a moderate volume. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day a lunatic from the HOA tried to arrest me for trespassing in my own house. The day started off calm. I had just come home from a long shift and just wanted to rest. No crime, no paperwork, no annoying people. But I should have known that peace was a temporary concept in this neighborhood. I got out of the car and drove straight to my house. I barely put the key in the lock and heard a shrill voice behind me. "Hey! Hey! What do you think you're doing?" I turned my face slowly, already knowing that nothing good would come of this conversation. And there she was, the woman who made life hell for all the neighbors, the one who handed out fines as if she were a Supreme Court judge, the same woman who once threatened a 10-year-old boy because he was skateboarding on the sidewalk. She marched up to me, her eyes full of fury and the posture of someone who thinks she's the last cookie in the packet. "We don't allow intruders in this community." I blinked, processing the information. "Intruders? You're trying to trespass," she continued, pointing at me as if she'd just caught a very serious crime. For a moment, I thought she was joking. But no, she was 100% serious. The fatigue of the long shift was still weighing on my shoulders. I could just put my hand up, show my badge, and put an end to this nonsense. But honestly, I wanted to see how far it would go. "Oh yeah?" I asked, crossing my arms. "And how did you come to that conclusion?" She huffed impatiently. "I've never seen you here before, and as president of the HOA, it's my responsibility to make sure criminals don't enter our community." Ah, so that was it. She's never seen me because I work most of the time. I swallowed back a laugh. "I live here," I said, pointing to the door I was about to open before this crazy woman interrupted me. She crossed her arms and looked me up and down, as if trying to find a lie in what I'd said. Prove it. Prove it. Did the woman really think she could force me to prove that my house was mine? My name was on the deed. I had the keys. But apparently, none of that mattered to the HOA dictator. That's when she pulled out a radio. Yes, a bloody radio. "I have a trespassing suspect on Main Street. I need a unit immediately." And I swear to God, she waited like she was actually talking to a real police force. Seconds later, two men appeared from across the street. They wore cheap uniforms and had those ridiculous HOA badges hanging around their necks. The cops from the neighborhood association. In other words, two idiots paid to pretend they had some authority. And now, they were marching towards me with an expression of false seriousness, ready to arrest me. Little did they know that they were about to make the worst mistake of their lives. The two guys crossed the street with an air of exaggerated importance, as if they had just been given a life-and-death mission. Except their mission was ridiculously stupid. One of them, a guy with a beer belly and a face like he'd failed all his police academy exams, put his hands on his waist and looked me up and down. The other, thinner and with a thin mustache, was clearly trying to look intimidating. He failed miserably. And the woman? Oh, she was standing there with her arms crossed and a little smile of victory on her face, waiting for those two assholes to resolve the situation. The first officer snorted and assumed a posture he had probably rehearsed in the mirror before leaving home. "Sir, we've received a report of trespassing." I blinked, surprised at the seriousness in his voice. He really thought this was a legitimate case. "Report," I repeated. "And who reported it?" The woman stepped forward, beaming. "I did." "Of course you did." The second officer pulled out a notebook and a plastic pen. Yes, a damn notebook. As if he was about to write a traffic ticket or a warning note for a dog that had peed in the wrong place. "We need to see some ID, sir," he said, trying to maintain a firm tone. Now that was getting good. I could have sorted everything out right then and there, flashed my badge, and lectured him on abuse of authority. But where was the fun in that? So I decided to test their patience. Identification, I asked, feigning confusion. And since when does HOA security have the authority to ask for that? The two exchanged quick glances, clearly trying to find an answer. But the woman wasn't going to let the opportunity to play the powerful one slip away. "Since I'm president of the HOA," she boomed, her chin thrust out, "I have every right to ensure that strangers don't wander around here." I had to hold back my laughter. "But I'm not a stranger. I live here." "Then prove it." The woman really thought I had to prove something to her. The first HOA officer stepped forward. "Sir, if you can't prove that you live in this residence, we're going to have to ask you to leave the property until we clarify the situation." Now I laughed, loudly. "Me off my property?" I asked, shaking my head. "And what happens if I don't?" The mustachioed man with the pad tried to thicken his voice. "We can stop you." Ah, that was the best part. I laughed again, this time harder. The neighborhood was already starting to notice what was going on. Some people came out to see what all the ridiculous little theater was about in the middle of the street. But the best part was seeing the woman's confidence starting to crack. "What are you laughing at?" she asked, irritated. "At you," I replied, opening my wallet and taking out my badge. The real badge. The town sheriff's badge. The woman froze. The two HOA cops stood completely still. The notebook slipped out of the mustachioed man's hand and fell to the floor. "And me?" I just smiled. "Do you really want to carry on with this clowning?" I asked, twirling the badge between my fingers. The woman blinked a few times, as if trying to process what had just happened. Her neurons were frying. You're a policeman?" she stammered. "More than that, dear. I'm the town sheriff." The first HOA officer swallowed. The second tried to say something, but his brain was probably busy trying to find an escape route. But the most beautiful thing was seeing the panic in the woman's eyes. She had spent years thinking she was the supreme queen of the neighborhood, controlling it as if she owned it all. Now, she had just tried to kick a sheriff out of her own house. The tables had turned, and she was about to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong person. The silence that followed was so deep that I could hear the rusty gears in her head trying to turn. The first HOA security guard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and looked like a fish out of water trying to catch its breath. The other, the one with the little pad, was still paralyzed, as if waiting for a command from the supreme boss of stupidity. And Karen? Well, Karen was having a complete operating system failure. She was blinking rapidly, trying to process the information, as if she were facing an impossible mathematical equation. She knew she had screwed up, but her brain refused to accept it. That can't be right. She finally managed to get out, her voice shaking. I raised my badge again, just to make sure everyone got a good look. "If you want, you can call the police station and confirm it," I said, smiling. "Or rather, I can call them myself. After all, it seems that someone here likes to involve the police for nothing." Karen paled. The two HOA security guards didn't know where to look. The only thing that would stop this moment from being perfect would be if one of them fainted right there. So nervous. But of course, Karen wasn't going to give up without a fight. The woman straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and tried to regain her air of superiority. Only now, instead of confidence, she just looked like a stubborn child trying to convince her parents that she hadn't broken a vase while holding the shards in her hand. "That doesn't change anything," she snapped, crossing her arms tightly. "This is a closed community, and I'm responsible for making sure the rules are followed." There you go. Here came the "I'm in charge here" card. I sighed, crossing my arms. "And what exactly are these rules? Because I'm in my house, on my land, and now you're standing on my property, without permission." The neighborhood started whispering. The spectators at this absurd theater were enjoying themselves more and more. I saw a couple pulling out lawn chairs because clearly this show deserved a VIP seat. Karen realized that the tide was against her. She looked at the HOA security guards as if hoping for some support, some affirmation, some help to escape the hole she dug. But they were both in a cold sweat. Neither wanted to risk another word. The one with the notebook tried to kick it away, as if that would erase the fact that he had tried to report me. That was a misunderstanding, Karen started to say, trying to regain a shred of dignity. Maybe there was a mix-up. Maybe you've just committed a crime, I interrupted, raising an eyebrow. The shock on her face was instantaneous. A crime? Let's see. False reporting. Attempting to remove a resident from their home without legal justification. Abuse of authority under a position that doesn't even give you any real powers. I started counting on my fingers. Not to mention that you used those two to try to detain me without any legal basis. Does that sound like a problem to you or not? Karen looked like she was about to evaporate with rage. The neighbors? Oh, they were loving it. The little lady next door, who had already been fined because her lawn was turning yellow, was holding a cell phone and filming everything. This could make a great post in the neighborhood group, huh? She muttered to someone next door. Oh, sure, another neighbor replied, trying to hold in his laughter. The woman began to shake with frustration. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the futile attempt to find a way out of this mess without losing all the credibility she thought she had. But it was too late. The whole neighborhood had seen the moment Karen tried to use her ridiculous power against the wrong person. And, for the first time, she realized that she was alone. I have to go, she finally let out, her voice much less firm than before. That can be solved another way. And then she turned and just walked away. No apology, no acknowledgement of the mess she'd made. Just a humiliating escape. The HOA security guards exchanged desperate glances and followed her, like two abandoned puppies. I stood there, watching the spectacle. But then an idea struck me. Hey, Karen, I called out, making her stop in the middle of the road. She turned around slowly, clearly wishing she was anywhere else in the world. Next time you want to play policeman, I suggest you learn the laws first, I said, smiling. The neighbors burst into laughter. Karen pressed her lips together, turned her back, and practically ran into the house. Now all that remained was to see how she was going to try to clean up her own image after this monumental fiasco. But, spoiler, she wasn't going to succeed. Karen disappeared from my sight that night, but I knew that wasn't the end of the story. This woman didn't know how to lose. She could have slipped into the house, but I was sure that, at that moment, she was up to something to try and regain the power she thought she had. And I was right. The next morning, I was on my balcony, enjoying my coffee, when I felt my cell phone vibrate. The notifications were going off. The neighborhood Facebook group was on fire. And at the center of it all, Karen. She had posted a long text. Yesterday, I was the victim of an unfair and humiliating situation. As HOA president, I have always worked to ensure order and safety in our neighborhood. However, individuals with no respect for the rules are trying to undermine the authority that sustains our community. I have been publicly dismissed by someone who clearly does not understand the importance of the organized structure of the HOA. But I will not allow this to continue. Ah, that's it. Now she was playing the victim. The woman actually had the nerve to suggest that the whole thing was an orchestrated plan to remove her from power. And best of all, nobody believed her. In the comments, people showed no mercy. You tried to arrest the town's own sheriff. Karen, shut up. Did you really think you could kick someone out of their own house? Jesus, how delusional is that? For God's sake, you need a hobby, preferably away from here. But then came the best blow of all. Mrs. Jenkins posted a video. Yes, the video of Karen calling HOA security, trying to kick me out of my own house, and then discovering that I was the sheriff. The video went viral in the group. More than 300 reactions in less than 10 minutes. Now, Karen was completely exposed. And that's when the HOA, the very group she used so much to make everyone's life hell, turned against her. That night, an emergency meeting was called. The HOA wanted to discuss the inappropriate behavior of their self-proclaimed leader. Karen showed up as if nothing had happened. She still maintained her posture, her face of superiority, pretending that she was the victim of it all. But the tone of the meeting was different. For the first time, no one was on her side. People started talking. One neighbor said that Karen had already threatened to fine him because the color of his door was too vibrant. Another reported that she had tried to confiscate a child's tricycle because dumped toys make the neighborhood look messy. And that's when the vice president of the HOA, a gentleman who until then had always supported her, stood up and said something no one expected. "I'd like to make a motion to remove Miss Karen as president of the HOA. The silence that followed was delicious. Karen's eyes widened. Her desperation was visible. This is absurd," she shouted. "I'm the only person qualified to keep this neighborhood in order." The vice president just took out a piece of paper, read aloud the allegations against her, and then asked, "Those in favor of removing Karen from the HOA?" All hands were raised. Karen lost. There, in front of everyone, she was removed as president of the HOA. The final blow. The end of her era. After the meeting, Karen rushed home. And then, the next day, a house for sale sign appeared in front of her house. The woman couldn't cope with the humiliation. With no power, no respect, no one to flatter her, there was nothing left to hold her back. The neighborhood, on the other hand, was overjoyed. A week later, a moving truck showed up. Karen was carrying boxes with a blank expression, as if she were in shock. She got into the car, didn't look at anyone, and drove off. No goodbyes, no tributes, no importance. She had spent years trying to boss everyone around, and now no one cared where she was going. The neighborhood was finally free. Children could play without fear of fines. Neighbors could decorate their houses however they wanted. But what about me? I sat on my balcony, sipping my coffee, and just watched the scene, savoring my victory. Karen tried to use her power against the wrong person and lost everything in the process. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.